Okay, we are going to look at forms of quadratic equations, standard form, vertex form, and factor form, and what key attributes you can get from each, because you get different pieces of information from different forms of quadratic functions. So we're going to look at standard form first. That's when you can have an x squared, an x, and a constant term. So you're going to see your a, b, and c coefficients. Now keep in mind you may not see all three because one of the coefficients or more could be 0. The only one that is not going to be a 0 is your a coefficient, because you need this x squared term to create that parabola or that U shape. So your y-intercept, you can see just by looking at it, it is going to be your C coefficient. So our C coefficient in this is 4. So this parabola is going to cross the y-axis at the ordered pair 0, 4. Okay, it's my y-intercept. And I don't even need to do any math. I just need to know where to look when I recognize standard form. Axis of symmetry. You can get your axis of symmetry by taking the opposite of your B coefficient and dividing it by 2A. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take the opposite of our B coefficient, and in our example, our B coefficient is a -8. Well, what's the opposite of a -8? That would be a +8. And we're going to divide it by 2 times the A coefficient, and in this case, our A coefficient is a -2. And again, I want to put parentheses around my A coefficient because I'm multiplying. I don't want it to look like I'm adding or subtracting. And so now I'm going to get my calculator. I'm going to clear the memory really quick. And now I'm going to type in alpha y equals enter. 8 divided by 2 times a -2. And that's going to give me 2. So my axis of symmetry is x equals -2. From a vertex form, you can get your vertex point. You can also tell if that is a max or a min by looking at the sign of your A coefficient. Remember, a positive A value, if your A coefficient is positive, your parabola is going to open up. If your A coefficient is negative, your parabola is going to reflect over the x-axis, and it's going to now open down. And that will help me figure out if my vertex is a max or a minimum point, okay? And then you can also get your axis of symmetry because your equation is going to be the x coordinate of your vertex point. So now let's look here. So I want to get my vertex point HK. So H is going to be the number inside the parentheses with x. And remember, it's got to have a sign change because I'm subtracting H. And when I subtract a negative, that's what causes it to turn into a positive. So this is really a -3. And then my K is going to be after the parentheses squared. And that number is a -7. And there is no sign change. Think about it like an outside number. No sign change. It does exactly what you think. And now I want to write my axis of symmetry. So it's going to be x equals h. Well, what was our h? Our h was that -3. So that is my equation for my axis of symmetry. And now I want to figure out, is this vertex a maximum or a minimum? And if I look back at my A coefficient, it's a negative. Okay, doesn't matter what the number is. It could be -1, -2, -5. As long as A is negative, you know that this opens down, which means your vertex is a maximum. And then last but not least, if it's in factor form, and you know it's going to be in factor form because you're going to see parentheses, you will not see parentheses squared. So if you want to get your x-intercepts, all you have to do is set all 3 or 2 of your parentheses to equal to 0. So you're going to start with your GCF. -2 equals 0. Then we're going to go to our, what's in the first parentheses, x plus 3 equals 0. And then what's in the last parentheses, 2x plus 5 equals 0. Now, if I want to get the x-intercept, I have to solve. Well, look here, -2 is never going to be equal to 0. So while this is a factor, it's a GCF, it is not going to tell me an x-intercept. It doesn't work. Here, I want to figure out what is the value of x. So when I add 3, I get 0, and that means x has to be equal to a -3. So I know that this crosses the x-axis at -3, 0. And now I'm going to solve for this one. So this is going to require a little bit more math. I'm going to have to subtract 5 from both sides first. And this is going to leave me with 2x equals -5. And I don't want 2x. I want the value of 1x. So I'm going to divide by 2. X equals. So now I'm going to have -5 divided by 2. And I'm going to make that a fraction. So I'm going to a decimal, math 2, enter. And it's equal to -2.5. So I know that this parabola crosses the x-axis at -3 and -2.5. And that's what I should see when I graph my quadratic. Okay. For converting from standard or vertex to standard, vertex form is when you have the parentheses squared. So what you're going to need to do is you are going to need to do the box method first. So whatever is in parentheses squared, that is like having x plus 1 times x plus 1. So I'm going to use the box. And I'm going to fill in my boxes by using my multiplication skills. So I'm going to have x squared plus 1x plus 1x plus 1. And then I'm going to combine like terms. And remember, my diagonal boxes are going to be like terms, so I can combine those together. So I'm really going to end up with x squared plus 2x plus 1. And I'm going to put that in parentheses because now I have to bring down my a coefficient, the -3. And I also have to bring down my c coefficient, or this constant here. I don't know if it's my c coefficient yet, because I can't just leave those off, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute by a. So every coefficient that's inside the parentheses, the a, b, and c coefficients, are going to get multiplied by -3. So I'm going to have -3x squared. Now I'm going to have -3 times 2, which is -6, so -6x. And then -3 times 1, which is going to be -3. And then I'm going to bring down that -2 because I can't leave it off. I still need to take care of it. And now I'm going to combine like terms. Well, the only terms that I have to combine are my two constants at the end. So my final equation is going to be f of x equals -3x squared minus 6x. And then I want to see, okay, if I start with a -3 and I subtract 2, I'm going to get -5. So minus 5. And that is going to be my standard form equation. Now I can see my a, b, and my c coefficients.